In a two-story house in a small residential neighborhood in Connecticut, Margaret Hamilton sat holding her morning coffee, gazing out the window at the cherry tree in the yard. Her posture was straight, and her graying hair was neatly arranged. 40 years of experience as a nurse had given her a natural dignity and composure. Ever since losing her husband John to a heart attack 5 years ago, Margaret had been living with her daughter Lisa's family. At first, she had been hesitant, but now she had naturally blended in as a member of the family. She helped prepare breakfast, looked after her grandson Ethan, and after dinner, the whole family would watch television together. Such peaceful days had continued. "Grandma, will you make my lunch today too?" 12-year-old Ethan called out as he ran down the stairs. With his brown hair still messy and his school uniform disheveled, he looked like the energetic boy he was. However, his eyes held a wisdom beyond his years. "Of course. Today I'll pack a ham sandwich, an apple, and some cookies," Margaret answered, giving her grandson a light kiss on the cheek. Ethan smiled happily, though he looked a bit embarrassed. "Ethan, hurry up and eat your breakfast. You'll be late for school." Lisa poked her head out from the kitchen. She had the same gentle eyes as her mother, but there was a somewhat tired expression on her face. Teaching 3rd grade at the elementary school, she tended to be overly responsible and was always worrying about others. "Good morning, Mom. You're up early today." "I have a PTA meeting." Tom already left. Tom was a man who worked in sales at a local insurance company. He wasn't tall, but he had a sturdy build and always maintained a serious expression. When Margaret first moved in, he had been a bit confused, but now he cherished his mother-in-law like his own mother. He worked hard from early morning until late at night, doing his best for his family. "He seems so busy lately. I worry he might get sick." Margaret placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Lisa showed a slightly relieved expression at her mother's warmth. "It's okay, Mom. Tom is strong." Even as she said this, there was anxiety mixed in Lisa's voice. Her husband's work stress, their son's education expenses, and living with her mother, Margaret could sense that Lisa was dealing with various concerns in her own way. After Ethan left for school and Lisa headed to work, Margaret was alone cleaning the house and thinking. Life with this family was truly happy. Her daughter and son-in-law never treated her like a burden and always showed consideration. Especially the time with Ethan was more precious to her than anything else. When she lost her husband, Margaret had fallen into deep despair. However, because of her family's support, she was able to find meaning in life again. In the afternoon, Margaret was tending to the flowers in the garden. She had built good relationships with the neighbors, and many people would stop by during their walks to chat. "Mrs. Hamilton, you look well today as always." Mrs. Johnson from next door called out to her. "Thank you. I'm blessed with family, and every day is fulfilling." While exchanging such conversations, Margaret was truly satisfied from the bottom of her heart. However, deep in her heart, there was one heavy shadow. It was about her son David. She had barely been in contact with him for 10 years. He had become obsessed with gambling, caused trouble for the family, and then suddenly disappeared one day. Sometimes Margaret would wake up in the middle of the night and lie awake thinking about her son. Where was he now and what was he doing? Was he healthy? As a mother, her love for her son could never completely disappear. In the evening, when Tom returned from work, the whole family gathered for dinner. Ethan excitedly talked about what happened at school, Lisa gently nodded along to her son's stories, and Tom, though showing a tired expression, cherished the time with his family. "Grandma, would you like to go see a movie with me this weekend?" At Ethan's suggestion, Margaret nodded happily. She wished from her heart that these peaceful, love-filled days would continue forever. On an afternoon when the cold March rain was beating against the windows, Margaret was in the living room helping Ethan with his homework. While looking at her grandson's serious profile as he worked on math problems, she felt peaceful. Just then, the doorbell rang. I wonder who that could be. Margaret stood up and opened the door. Standing there was a face she recognized, but it had changed greatly from her memory of 10 years ago. Mom. It was David. Her son had grown thin and pale. He who had once been tall with an athletic build now had slumped shoulders and was wearing shabby clothes. However, there seemed to be an honesty in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. David. Margaret's voice was trembling. For 10 years, she had been worried about her son's whereabouts. She would wake up in the middle of the night and pray for his safety. That son was now standing right in front of her. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. David's voice was hoarse. He knelt in front of his mother and bowed his head. Come in. It's cold out there. Margaret invited her son into the house. Ethan, who was in the living room, looked confused when he saw the unfamiliar man. Ethan, this is your uncle. Uncle David. Uncle. Ethan had heard from his mother that there was an uncle who had gone missing. However, this was the first time he had actually met him. So you're Ethan. You've grown so big. David smiled gently at his nephew. That smile held traces of his former self. Margaret made coffee for her son and sat facing him. David held the steaming cup with both hands and slowly began to speak. These past 10 years, I've been living a really terrible life. I made debts from gambling, caused trouble for the family, and left home as if I was running away. But Mom, I've changed. There was an unprecedented seriousness in his voice. 3 years ago, I participated in a gambling addiction treatment program. There I faced my problems and understood how deeply I had hurt my family. The treatment was hard, but I was finally able to get myself back. Margaret quietly listened to her son's words. As a mother, she could feel her son's suffering. At the same time, she harbored anxiety about whether he had really changed. Now I'm working at a construction site. The pay isn't much, but I'm working honestly. And every day I've been thinking about my family. Especially about you, Mom. David was crying. I hurt you, Mom, and caused you worry. I'm truly sorry. But I'm not the same person I used to be. I want to start over as a member of the family. Margaret took her son's hand. That hand was rough from labor, but it was warm. David, you are my precious son. No matter what happens, that will never change. Mother and son embraced. Ethan watched with some confusion, but seeing his grandmother's joy, he felt relieved. That night, when Lisa and Tom returned home, Margaret reported David's return. Lisa showed a complex expression. Knowing her brother's past behavior, she couldn't easily accept him. Has he really changed? To Lisa's question, David answered sincerely. I caused you all tremendous trouble. That's a fact, and I don't expect to be easily forgiven. But I really have changed. I want to take time to prove that. Tom was cautious. Knowing his brother-in-law's past, he was wary from the standpoint of protecting his family. However, seeing Margaret's joy, he decided to observe the situation for now. From the next day, David began visiting the house frequently. He played catch with Ethan and accompanied Margaret on shopping trips. His attitude certainly seemed to have changed. However, after 2 weeks had passed, subtle changes began to appear in David's behavior. Mom, actually I have something I want to discuss with you. One afternoon, David approached his mother. The construction work is ending, and I'm thinking of starting my own small company. But I need initial funding. A faint anxiety crossed Margaret's mind. How much do you need? $5,000 would be enough. I'll definitely pay it back. $5,000 was by no means a small amount for Margaret. For her, living on her husband's life insurance money and pension, it was part of her precious savings. Let me think about it a little. Margaret avoided giving an immediate answer. After that, David began to bring up financial assistance repeatedly. At first he was hesitant, but gradually he became more persistent. Mom, I really have changed. If I miss this opportunity, I might go back to my old life. His words were beginning to take on the manipulative tone of the past. Margaret was beginning to sense that problematic parts of her son's old self remained. A week later, Margaret made her decision. David, I cannot lend you the money. Why not? I'm your son, aren't I? David's voice contained irritation. You are my precious son. But I don't think lending you money would really be good for you. If you've truly changed, you should forge your own path with your own strength. Margaret's words were gentle but full of determination. You don't believe me, do you? David's expression changed. There was the hate-filled face she had seen 10 years ago. I don't care about this family anymore. Everyone looks down on me. Especially my sister's husband, he's been suspicious of me from the beginning. David, that's not enough. I'm never coming back here again. David stood up, shouting. At that moment, Ethan was secretly watching from the top of the stairs. You'll regret this. David left the house with those parting words. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house. Margaret sank into her chair and sighed deeply. Love for her son and disappointment in him were complexly intertwined in her heart. She thought she had made the right decision, but at the same time, she felt deep sadness. 3 days after David angrily left the house, Margaret woke up early as usual and began preparing breakfast. However, she had an uneasy feeling. She had woken up several times during the night, and her son's last words wouldn't leave her mind. You'll regret this, Mom, his voice lingered in her ears. Good morning, Grandma. Ethan came down the stairs. His voice was as cheerful as always, but his expression looked a little worried. Good morning, Ethan. Did you sleep well? Yes. But what about you, Grandma? I heard footsteps in the hallway last night. The perceptive boy had sensed his grandmother's worry. I'm fine. I was just thinking about some things. Margaret gently stroked her grandson's head. However, she wasn't really fine. Love for her son and disappointment in his unchanged nature weighed heavily in her heart. After breakfast, Lisa and Tom left for work, and Ethan headed to school. Margaret was alone doing housework. She vacuumed, hung up the laundry, and went through her usual routine, but her heart was restless. In the afternoon, Margaret was changing bed sheets in the upstairs bedroom. After finishing cleaning Ethan's room, when she stood at the top of the stairs to go to her own room, she felt something was wrong. The stair railing seemed somehow unsteady. That's strange. Margaret lightly shook the railing. It was indeed more unstable than usual. Thinking she should ask Tom to fix it, she began carefully descending the stairs. When she reached the 3rd step, it happened. The stair board she stepped on suddenly tilted, and Margaret lost her balance. She tried to grab the railing, but it came loose with her. Margaret's short scream echoed through the house. Her body tumbled down the stairs and hit the hard flooring on the 1st floor head first. Her consciousness ended there. Mrs. Johnson from next door noticed the strange noise and visited Margaret's house 20 minutes later. The front door was unlocked. When she entered the living room, she found Margaret collapsed at the bottom of the stairs. Margaret! Oh my God! Mrs. Johnson quickly called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, Margaret was breathing but unconscious. She had a large wound on her head and was bleeding. Severe head trauma. We need to transport her to the hospital immediately. The paramedics' urgent voice rang out. In the intensive care unit at St. Mary's General Hospital, Margaret was connected to life support machines. After the doctors thoroughly examined her condition, they called her family. Lisa rushed from school, running breathlessly through the hospital corridors and hearing the doctor's explanation in front of the ICU. Tom also hurried from work and stood next to his wife. "You're Mrs. Hamilton's family, correct?" Dr. Smith faced the family with a serious expression. "Your mother's condition is very serious. She has suffered severe brain contusion from the fall down the stairs. She's currently in a coma and needs life support." Lisa's face turned pale. Tom supported his wife's shoulder. "What are the prospects for recovery?" To Tom's question, the doctor answered with a heavy tone. "To be honest, the situation is very dire. With such severe brain damage, even if her life is saved, there's a high possibility she may never regain consciousness." Lisa nearly broke down crying. "You mean she would be in a vegetative state?" "I'm afraid that possibility is high. As a family, you may be faced with very difficult decisions." The doctor's words sounded hopeless to the family. During ICU visiting hours, Lisa and Tom sat at Margaret's bedside. Various tubes were connected to her body, and monitors continued to show signs of life. It was so different from the once active mother-in-law they knew. "Tom, what should we do?" Lisa whispered while gripping her husband's hand. "Mom is only 62. She was supposed to enjoy so much more of life." Tom tried to comfort his wife, but he was also shaken. Margaret had been like a real mother to him. Supported by her warmth and wisdom, the family had lived happily. Listening to what the doctor said, Tom trailed off. But the meaning was clear. "She's just an old person anyway." The words Lisa whispered were born from exhaustion and despair. She loved her mother, but she also had to consider practical problems. Medical expenses, care issues, the impact on Ethan. That's right. She wouldn't want to live in this condition. Tom felt the same way. They held hands and quietly left the hospital room. The next day, when Ethan came home from school, he was told about his grandmother's accident. "Where's Grandma? Can I go see her?" "Ethan, Grandma is in a very dangerous condition right now. Children aren't allowed to visit," Lisa gently explained to her son. However, Ethan's worry was serious. His grandmother was one of the most important people to him. That night, Lisa and Tom discussed the future with the doctor. "Please discuss as a family whether to continue life-sustaining treatment. However, please understand that with current medicine, the possibility of regaining consciousness is extremely low." The doctor's words weighed heavily on the family's hearts. For 3 days, Margaret remained in a coma. Lisa and Tom visited every day, but gradually their visits became less frequent. Both were mentally exhausted by the hopeless situation. On the morning of the 4th day, a miracle happened. Margaret's finger moved slightly. There was a change in the monitor readings, which a nurse noticed. "Dr. Smith. The patient is showing response." When the doctor rushed over, Margaret's eyelids slowly opened. "Mrs. Hamilton. Can you hear me?" Margaret's eyes couldn't focus properly, but she was definitely regaining consciousness. "Water." It was a hoarse voice, but clear words. "It's a miracle." The doctor couldn't hide his surprise. Regaining consciousness from such a severe case was extremely rare medically. However, when Margaret fully regained consciousness, there was no one in the hospital room. Her family hadn't come. In the silence, she tried to understand her situation. She tried to move her body, but still had no strength. Her head was wrapped in bandages, and various tubes were connected to her body. Her memory was vague, but she remembered falling down the stairs. While looking around the bedside table, Margaret found a small folded piece of paper next to her pillow. With trembling hands, she picked it up and slowly opened it. There, written in careful, childlike handwriting, was, "Grandma, I know who did it. Ethan." Margaret's heart began beating violently. Who did it? What did they do? And why had Ethan left such a note? She clutched the note with trembling hands while considering various possibilities in her mind. The loose stair railing, David's last words, and the fact that no family members had come to visit. Everything was beginning to connect. As Margaret clutched Ethan's note, the hospital room door opened quietly. Looking back, she saw her 12-year-old grandson standing there with a worried expression. He had slipped past the nurses to see his grandmother. "Grandma! You're awake." Ethan ran over with expressions of joy and relief. However, he immediately looked around and lowered his voice. "I came secretly without telling Mom and Dad. They said children couldn't visit." Margaret grasped her grandson's hand. She was still weak, but she could feel the warmth. "Ethan, this note?" Margaret asked in a trembling voice. "Did you write this?" "What do you mean by, who did it?" Ethan looked around, confirmed no one was there, and brought his face close to his grandmother's ear. "Grandma, Uncle David tampered with the stairs. I saw him do it." Margaret went pale. "Tell me the details." Ethan began explaining in a small voice. "That night after Uncle David left angry, I couldn't sleep and was looking out the window. Then around 2 a.m., Uncle came back. He came in through the back door and had a toolbox." Margaret gasped. "I got scared and watched from the top of the stairs. Uncle loosened the stair railing and did something to the third step too. He was using a screwdriver to remove something." Ethan's testimony was specific and had details that didn't seem like a child's made-up story. The next morning, Uncle came again with an innocent face and told Mom and Dad he wanted to make up with Mom. But I knew Uncle was lying. Margaret began to understand her son's terrible plan. David had tried to kill his mother, out of spite for being refused financial help. "So after the accident, I thought about telling the police, but Mom and Dad were saying Grandma might not make it, and they wouldn't listen to my story." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. "So I decided to wait until Grandma woke up. I thought Grandma would believe my story." Margaret hugged her grandson. This clever boy had been carrying this terrible truth alone. "Ethan, you did well. But from now on, leave it to the adults." Just then, footsteps could be heard from the hallway. Ethan tried to hide, but it was a nurse who entered. "Oh, you have a visitor. But children's visits are. This is my grandson. Please, just give us a little time." At Margaret's desperate plea, the nurse looked troubled but promised to return in 10 minutes and left the room. "Ethan, let's have the police called right away." Margaret pressed the nurse call button. When the nurse returned, she explained the situation and requested that the police be contacted. 30 minutes later, Detective Johnson visited the hospital room. He was a veteran detective at the local police station with experience handling many domestic cases. "Mrs. Hamilton, how are you feeling? I heard there might be a possibility of attempted murder." Margaret explained the situation in detail. Her son's return, his request for financial assistance and her refusal, his anger and threats. And Ethan's eyewitness testimony. "We need to check the condition of the stairs. We'll conduct a crime scene investigation." Detective Johnson listened seriously to the story. Violence against elderly people within families was unfortunately not uncommon. "Ethan, can you tell me again in detail what you saw?" The detective spoke gently to the boy. Ethan was nervous at first but gradually began to tell the details. The tools David had, how long the work took, and even his acting the next morning. "You're really brave. Thank you for your important testimony." The detective placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. An hour later, the forensics team arrived at Margaret's house. When they examined the stairs closely, they found that the railing fixtures had been artificially loosened. The third step board also had its supports partially removed, rigged to come loose when weight was applied. This is definitely artificial tampering. Based on the forensics report, Detective Johnson was convinced. Find David Hamilton's whereabouts. The next day, David was arrested at the construction site where he worked. His co-workers were surprised, but the site supervisor testified that his behavior had been strange lately. In the interrogation room, David initially denied the charges. "I would never think of killing Mom. I just wanted to reconcile with my family." However, when confronted with Ethan's detailed testimony and physical evidence from the scene, his attitude began to change. "I have debts. If I fall behind on payments, my life is in danger." David began to confess painfully. "I said I quit gambling, but I was actually still continuing. The debt kept growing, and I was at my limit." According to his story, his total debt had reached $80,000. The repayment deadline was approaching, and threats from creditors were intensifying. "If Mom died, I would get the inheritance. I thought I could pay off the debt with that." David's confession was selfish and cold-hearted. "But I didn't intend to kill Mom directly. I thought I'd make it look like an accident. That's why I tampered with the stairs. That's still attempted murder. It's fortunate that your mother miraculously survived, but one wrong step and it would have been murder." At Detective Johnson's stern point, David held his head in his hands. What was I doing? Finally, the weight of his crime was beginning to be understood within him. After taking his statement, the detective visited Margaret's hospital room again. "Mrs. Hamilton, your son has confessed. He admitted to tampering with the stairs and will be charged with attempted murder." Margaret had complex feelings. While there was relief that the truth had been revealed with her son's crime confirmed, as a mother she also felt deep sadness. "How is my son doing now? He appears to be reflecting in detention. He needs proper treatment for gambling addiction." Margaret nodded at the detective's words. That night, Lisa and Tom visited the hospital. They had been contacted by the police and were stunned to learn the truth. "Mom, I'm so sorry." Lisa cried as she apologized. "We said terrible things. She's just an old person anyway." Tom also bowed his head deeply. "Mom, I'm truly sorry. We're the worst." Margaret forgave them both. "You were suffering too. I understand." The family bond was about to become stronger through this difficulty. Meanwhile, Ethan was at his grandmother's bedside with a relieved expression. "Grandma, I did the right thing, didn't I?" "Yes, Ethan. You were truly brave. Thank you for saving Grandma." Margaret squeezed her grandson's hand. 6 months later, Margaret was tending to the roses in her garden. The scar on her head had become hidden by her hair, and her physical strength had almost completely recovered. The doctors called her recovery a miracle. However, Margaret herself believed she was able to recover because of her family's love and support. "Grandma, I made some tea." Ethan came out to the garden carrying a tray. He had become even more caring toward his grandmother than before. After the incident, their bond had deepened even further. "Thank you, Ethan. How was school today?" "I got a perfect score on my math test. The teacher praised me." Seeing Ethan's happy expression, Margaret smiled from her heart. Having this grandson made every day seem bright. Her relationship with Lisa and Tom had also changed dramatically since the incident. For the first few weeks, both were tormented by guilt. However, thanks to Margaret's active efforts to repair the family bonds, they were able to understand each other better than before. "Mom, there's a letter from David today." Lisa came out of the house holding an envelope. Margaret received letters from her son every month. David had been sentenced to 7 years for attempted murder. However, while serving his sentence, he was receiving treatment for gambling addiction and seriously facing himself. Each letter contained deep words of repentance and gratitude to his mother. After reading the letter, Margaret had complex feelings. The crime her son committed was unforgivable. However, as a mother, she also wanted to believe in his rehabilitation. David seems to be trying to change. It appears so. But it will take time. Lisa also had complex emotions toward her brother. Fear and anger mixed with sibling love. When dinner time came, the family of 4 gathered around the table. Tom had recently been promoted, and the household finances had improved. Most importantly, he had come to value time with his family. "Mom, why don't we celebrate Ethan's birthday somewhere special next month?" "That's a wonderful idea. Where would you like to go, Ethan?" "I want to have a picnic with the whole family. We can play catch in the park and eat Grandma's homemade sandwiches." At Ethan's simple wish, the family exchanged warm smiles. That night, Margaret sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the incident. Through that terrifying experience, she had come to understand anew what was truly important in life. It was not just blood relations, but the bonds of family who truly trusted each other. Her love for David hadn't changed. However, he had to take responsibility for the path he had chosen. As a mother, Margaret would continue to pray for her son's rehabilitation, but at the same time, she wanted to value her own life as well. Ethan came down the stairs and sat next to his grandmother. "Grandma, I was really scared at that time. But I wanted to protect you. Ethan, you're my little hero. Because you were there, the truth came to light." Margaret hugged her grandson. Family isn't just about being related by blood. The most important thing is caring for and supporting each other. Ethan nodded. In his own way, he was beginning to understand the meaning of family. Outside the window, the autumn night breeze was swaying the trees. Margaret smiled quietly. Because they had overcome difficulties, the current peace felt more precious. Tomorrow, another new day would begin with her beloved family. That alone was enough. David might someday be able to return as a true member of the family. Until that day, Margaret intended to continue waiting without giving up hope. Because that was a mother's love.